YouTube, what is going on? It is your boy Manu here, aka Mr. See It Before It Happens. And today, fellas, I'll bring to you our Throwback Thursday segment. I'm going to be breaking down Fancy versus JWell, two of the best players in the entire world. Again, facing off in the Madden 21 $750,000 tournament. Again, this was the biggest tournament in Madden history at that point. And before I get into the game, I'll break down both players. So, again, we got Fancy here on the left. Again, known for his prolific offense. And, again, I think a really underrated aspect of his game comes on defense. I really think he's one of the better defensive players at figuring out the most simplistic ways to play someone, especially versus these off-meta sets. A lot of times when you're a younger player or just in general, people tend to play robotic, on defense, and they just kind of follow setups. But Fancy's always been pretty good at figuring someone out throughout a game without doing too much on defense. Again, he's king simplicity on defense, as well as he's a really explosive offensive player and usually one of the better decision makers. Again, I think obviously the worst part of Fancy's game by far is I think his freestyle ability on offense is really non-existent, and I think that's the biggest drawback in this game. JWell, on the other hand, again, I think JWell's probably like the best decision maker I played against. He's probably the last person that I played that I would pick to just come out here and throw the ball away. Again, he makes really elite level reads, and obviously he uses really good spacing. And I think the thing about JWell too, defense. I think Fancy's a better defensive player than JWell. But the thing about JWell though is, even though he doesn't really adjust well in the game on defense, he's a really flexible player, and he's more open minded than Fancy. And I think he understands what Fancy's biggest weakness is, and he's willing to transition between style of plays on defense. Whereas we saw in the Decroft game, Decroft honestly played good defense on him, but a lot of it too was Fancy was just making bad mistakes in that game. Decroft was able to really take away a lot of his best plays later as the game went on, but Fancy was having people there, or he was just making really bad decisions, honestly. And I think JWell understands a little bit more that Fancy's biggest weakness on offense is, again, thinking past his best plays. Like when Fancy gets stuck on offense, again, Fancy really is stuck on offense, and he's not someone that's going to really figure it out. So I think JWell, knowing him, is going to understand that and is going to come up with a strategy to really challenge Fancy's best plays. And again, I think even though JWell is not a good in-game adjuster on defense, again, he's someone that if he sees a good defense versus trips, like, again, he runs trips himself. So if he sees that someone is running a good trips defense on him, he'll go and run it. So he's flexible in that regard. Whereas Fancy, again, he really wants to play the game one way on defense, and he is good within his style of play. But again, when Fancy in general is kind of forced to play outside of his comfort zone, I think he really starts to get exposed sometimes, and that's why I gave JWell the edge in this game. I picked him to win this game, just because I think JWell is a more complete offensive player. And JWell is not a great freestyler in offense, but he's still better at that aspect of offense than most people, and he's always been a solid freestyler. So that's why I gave JWell the edge in this game. And again, talking with T. Davis, again, he was asking me for the insights because obviously, I'm familiar with both of these players. And what I meant by Fancy plays robotic is not that he cut out the last part. And what I mean by Fancy played robotic when I was talking to T. Davis is I meant in scenarios when his best plays just aren't there in general. Like in terms of when, cut out the last little part. So I'm going to leave it pause here. But so if you're a viewer, trying to get into these tournaments and you're trying to prepare for these tournaments, again, what you really got to be looking for is you got to do your homework on your opponents. So you got to know their weaknesses, you got to know their strengths, and you got to use these previous games that they played to your advantage. So again, if you're a JWall, you've seen Fancy has had to really go through the ringer in this tournament. He's gone through a bit of a gauntlet, and I think Decroft was a really good test for Fancy, a really good challenge. And I think Decroft was able to bring out some of the worst parts of Fancy's game, especially towards the end of that game. So I really think JWall got some really good tape on Fancy, and I think this is something he already knew about him, but he's really going to challenge Fancy to think past his best plays. And what Decroft started doing at the end of the game that was giving Fancy a lot of trouble was he started putting a 30-yard flat out of like a cover 3 look on the trip side. And again, Fancy, obviously had a really good game plan. He was really the one that came up with, the playmaker and the crosser to beat the man coverage meta. But again, you evolve as the game goes on, and we knew that obviously the playmaker dragging the crosser was really good versus man. But once you start mixing in zone out of that same look, it got a little tough. So again, what Decroft was doing was putting those 30-yard flats. And I really started to give Fancy trouble at the end of these games. And you see Fancy try to go deep here on the first play. And I don't mind the shot play here, but honestly, too, you got to kind of expect someone that you've played so many times, someone that's really familiar, to not give up one of your best plays early on in the game. And honestly, I really like this play call here from Fancy. Because, again, I think you saw from the film, too, that Decroft was putting that 30-yard flat a lot, and I'm sure he was expecting JWall to be looking out for the crosser here, and he went with the underneath slant instead. And what you're going to see from JWall is, and again, JWall really ran this coverage the entire game. He might have ran man a couple times when Fancy didn't motion over, but JWall ran this basically 90% of the game. So really, what JWall is doing, it's hybrid coverage. So it's a good mix of man and zone. And like I said, I think Fancy's probably the best offensive player when he's playing versus more simplistic, conservative defenses. And that's kind of how most people play on defense. It's really, you'll see like cover 2, maybe cover 2 maple, cover 3, but they're not really going to do too much. Again, what JWall is doing here is, again, it's basically half man, half zone. So obviously JWall knows that the motion over crosser is going to beat the man. So again, he still has like, so instead of having Y manned up, he has, the safety and a 30-yard flat to protect against the crosser. And he has this hard flat here underneath to protect against those out routes that Fancy loved throwing. Because he knows that, again, Fancy's favorite play was, the out route from X, the B drag, as well as the motion over crosser. So, again, JWall came with a really good strategy to really challenge some of Fancy's best plays. So I really like this counter adjustment by Fancy. Again, a bit of an unfortunate, that's really something you would like him to come down with, but that was honestly a very good play from Fancy to complement the crosser play. Again, now from Fancy's perspective, again, if you're preparing for somebody like JWall, again, what kind of has to go, what you have to be doing, oh my god, cut that. So from Fancy's perspective, if you're going in preparing for JWall, again, Fancy really gets stuck in a certain way he really wants to play the game. Obviously, I think Fancy's really good at playing within his style of play on defense where, he's not going to try to do too much on defense. He probably plays the best defense you can in a really simplistic manner where, you're going to see a lot of man coverage. You're going to see some double maple, but nothing you've really never seen before. Nothing too out of the ordinary. But sometimes too, when you're playing these elite level players, again, you gotta challenge them a little bit. And to really challenge someone's best plays, again, you have to think outside the box a little bit sometimes. And again, you'll see a lot of the best defensive players. They run a good mix of man and zone. And again, Fancy or JL, just like Fancy, again, I think he really excels in offense when he's playing simplistic, conservative coverage shells on defense. So again, that's why I really thought JL is a really good stylistic matchup for Fancy. Is they both have that same thing in common where they're really good versus simple coverages. I think what gives JL the edge in this matchup is he's a bit better freestyler than Fancy. Like JL, like as we saw in one of the early tournament games, JL will kind of acknowledge that somebody is kind of stopping his best plays, and he'll create a play in the game to beat that one specific setup. But the reason I think JL is a solid, not great freestyler, again, he's above average at, not great at, is because again, when he starts matches up versus like elite caliber defensive players or top tier defensive players, you'll see that JL really just starts getting behind the eight ball. And what JL's style of freestyling is, I call what he does chasing, where he goes off in these random tangents, and he's the only offensive player that really does this. So like versus someone like Poison earlier in the tournament, Poison was able to actually stop him 3 times with a look that JL obviously wasn't familiar with, and it gave some of his best players trouble. And JL was able to figure it out later as the game went on, and was able to cook up a play versus that specific setup that Poison was doing. The problem is if JL had face off versus an elite level defensive player, he really sold out on offense to beat one specific setup. Whereas if Poison had maybe knew him a little bit better and was a little less predictable on defense, JL could have been in deep trouble in that game. So if you're Fancy preparing for this game, that's really the game film you got to be looking at. Was again, Poison isn't obviously one of the best defensive players. I just think stylistically he gave JL a lot of trouble because JL struggles more versus more aggressive defensive players who are blitzing more and are going to give you are not just going to run basic coverages. And again, I think Poison got a little too predictable though. And again, JL is a solid freestyler, and he's going to figure it out as the game goes on. And you can't just run 1 or 2 specific setups for someone like JL. So again, here I think this was great defense by Fancy, and even from the Chigs game here, and this is what I would have told Fancy is exactly what he's doing now is, the Sen 6, again, this is really similar to what Poison did versus JL as well earlier in the tournament. Also, Chigs as well, when he started to blitz JL, he was able to get JL into some trouble in offense and get him to throw a bad pass. He wasn't picked on it, but the times that JL did struggle in offense on this tournament was when someone was getting a little bit more aggressive. They were blitzing him, putting hard flats, and that gave JL trouble on offense. And on this first play of the game, Fancy really took a page out of Poison's book, blitz 6 with the hard flats. And again, that should have been a pick 6 on the first play of the game. And I honestly think that might have sealed the game for Fancy based on how this game went. But, and honestly, Fancy played great defense throughout this game. Again, he made JL work. But I really think he could have stepped it up maybe a notch and really and blitzed him a little bit more. I feel like if this was an online game, Fancy would have blitzed a lot more. I think he got conservative a little bit because it was a big game. But I know when they were playing online, he was a lot more aggressive with the blitz 6. And, it was something that could give an offense like this trouble because a lot of the routes are crossing, as you see here, over the middle of the field. So by the time the blitz comes in, everybody is crossing each other's face. They're high-fiving. And all the routes are going to, if you pause it here and the blitz hits, all these routes are right next to each other. So blitzing 6, with some hard flats mixed in, could give this offense some trouble, especially when you're sending B, across the face of the quarterback every single time. So Fancy definitely should have blitzed. I think if he mixed in more blitz 6, he could have created some more turnovers on defense. He played great defense, but I really think he could have created more turnovers if he had done the blitz six a few more times. I'm surprised he got away from it. So here in this 3rd and 10 from JO, again, this was great. Again, what makes JO a really good offensive player is, he's going to see on the last play what someone's doing. So post snap, JO took a picture on his head that Fancy was running cover one and only had the safety in the deep middle of the field. So on that next play, JO knows the weakness to cover one is that out and up route. It does a good job of getting over the man up, but again, Fancy was able to mix it up on him. But J was able to extend the play there. That was a great play call by J-Wall. But I think also too, once it gets later into the game, he's going to have to realize that Fancy's he's not always going to come back to the same defense on the next play. So he has to account for a few defensive setups on his play calls. Now 1st and 10, this was great recognition by J-Wall again. Again, he does a great job of keeping up with someone's tendencies, and again, someone who's really simplistic like Fancy. Again, J-Wall really thrives in these situations. So again, J-Wall recalls from earlier in the game. If you guys remember, in the first play of the game, Fancy had sent 6 on the 1st and 10. He played cover 2 on the trip side. So later in the game on that 1st and 10, J-Wall anticipates the blitz 6, and he knows that's going to be cover 2. And that's why he put the fade here on the outside from X. And that was great anticipation here by J-Wall on this play. Again, here in this 3rd and 4, J-Wall does get into the red zone. Again, the keys to the red zone is you really got to be a little creative down here. Again, you can't just come out and bunch your trips at end. The spaces on the field are way too condensed. So you really have to do some lab work down here, really think outside the box. And there's always these shooties and competitive men. And what I mean by that is, most of these high-level players, they know how to, take their user defender and run through one of the gaps to blow up the runs. So Fancy and J-Wall did the lab work of, coming up with this under center formation with some power runs to kind of counter like the meta shoots on defense. And honestly, that was just great vision there by J-Wall, and that was just great lab work by both of these guys to come up with something like this to, to counter the meta defense. And again, in the red zone, it's you do not be in shotgun passing the ball. It doesn't matter who it is. It's too hard on there. Again, if you're really looking to get better in the red zone, the MaddenAcademy.com, maximizing the red zone offense and defense, of course. Now back in this 1st and 10 for Fancy. So Fancy's going to go right back to this play, and I don't mind this at all. He sees J-Wall has those 30-yard flats up, And, this slant's going to do a good job of getting underneath the 30-yard flats. And JWall decides to blitz 6 out of man. And again, this is what JWall is just not a really good defensive player. He just does dumb things like this. Again, obviously, he's a phenomenal offensive player, but decisions like this on defense is why JWall can tend to struggle on the defensive side of the ball. It just made no sense to do that. If you're gonna blitz 6, do it out of zone. Again, this offense is built to beat man coverage deep. Again, it just made zero sense to blitz out of man on that play. That was really bad defense by JWall, and it just didn't make sense to do that. And here on the second and 13 from JWall, again, really the difference between JWall and Fancy is, JWall is more looking to attack different portions of the field, and Fancy honestly did a better job of it early in this game too, where he wasn't just looking to throw deep the entire game. Again, you saw it in the end of the Decroft game, he was starting to catch on to it, and Fancy just got super repetitive. But here, JWall's going to mix in the underneath curl. And honestly, I guess you should have thrown that a little bit earlier. If they have acrobat, those passes can be scary. From an offensive perspective, on those curls, they're usually really good versus man. You got to click on, aggressive catch them, so your receiver comes back to the ball. If you don't do that, again, your receiver's just not going to animate really, or it's going to allow for the defender behind to really animate on the ball. Now, Fancy's in the red zone again. I really love this under center information again. This is one of the keys on here to the red zone is just having a under center formation where you have the threats of the run to either side, the stretches, any power runs to counter shoots, as well as some decent passing plays, because a lot of times you really have to sell out versus these runs in the red zone because the pursuit angles aren't that great. And man, and really the pursuit angles is the angles the computers take at the ball carrier. So usually you have to sell to stop the runs in this game, and then you can sneak in a pass player too. So again, the way both of these guys approached the red zone was phenomenal. Now, Fancy does get stuck on a 3rd and goal at the 8. As soon as I was praising his red zone offense, he's at the 1, wasn't able to punch it in. And really, this can, when two elite players are facing off, this can really win or lose your Madden game is your red zone offense. Whether you're getting those 7s or 3s, it's so crucial in these big games when you're playing even level competitors or even level competition. And as you saw, JWall was able to get 7, running the ball on here, and Fancy had got held to 3 down here, and that's always going to come back to bite you in these big games. And here on this next drive here, and this is why I'm gonna pause it here. But again, JWall was sending a lot of 4 out, and obviously if you're sending 6b6 and you're hovering, a lot of times that pressure is going to come in. So again, the weakness of trips at this point was, well, depending on how you ran it, was, you know, everybody's kind of crossing over the middle of the field when you're sending 6, or, you know, let me go back, cut that part out. Jesus Christ. So 2nd and 4 here. Again, this is why I'm really surprised Fancy got away from the blitz 6. Again, that made it a lot harder to run trips, especially if you are constantly putting, you know, B on a slant, on a slant or drag to playmaker and back, because again, look at, even on a play like here, is, you know, these guys are going to be crossing, you know, over the middle of the field. So by the time the blitz hits, you know, everybody's going to be kind of, you know, over the middle, is going to be in the same area over the middle of the field. Honestly, if JWall snaps the pulse late, I'm not mad at this, because again, you have the seam streak, you have the drag underneath. It's going to be pretty hard to lurk between both of those. As long as you don't snap the pulse right by the line, then everybody's going to be too congested. But honestly, this is a great play setup as long as JWall snaps as late. But again, JWall sent out a lot of 4 and 5 compared to Fancy. So Fancy, I definitely think if this was an online game, Fancy would have blitzed a lot more. I think since it was a big game, he started getting a little conservative. Because again, big weakness to this playmaker. It took time for that playmaker drag to develop. So if you're able to blitz this, then it made offense a lot difficult. So again, Fancy was playing solid defense on him. Well, actually, he was playing really good defense on him. But like I said, he had opportunities, I really feel like, to create turnovers and get sacks. And JWall was able to piece together some drives, but a lot of times they were just, he was still able to get those broken plays off. I think if he would have, again, blitzed him a little bit more, it would have been a lot tougher. Let's see right here again on the 2nd and 10. Again, JWall sent out a lot of 5 out, whereas Fancy almost never sent 5 out. And again, it would have been really, if Fancy was doing what he did earlier in the game, where he was hard fighting that safety and blitzing 6. Again, by the time the blitz comes in, those drags are going to be crossing the face of the user. So JWall is just not going to have anybody to throw to on those plays, or even when JWall is sending 4. Again, he really doesn't have, JWall is designing these plays specifically to beat coverage defense. So I really think Fancy made a mistake of not ever going back to the blitz 6. That blew my mind. Like you get a pick 6 early in the game, you drop it, and you just never go back to the blitz. I'm really shocked by that from Fancy. So we get to one of the bigger plays in the game, the 2nd and 10. So Fancy, again, the story of this game was, after Fancy early on, he dropped that pick six. Again, Gerald popped him once with that streak. Fancy just really stopped blitzing completely. Again, that was crazy. I think Fancy just got too predictable on when he was blitzing. And the rest of the game, Fancy really just went to man coverage the entire game, whether it be cover 2 or cover 2 man or out of cover 1. So Fancy or J-Well really got comfortable just sending 4 or 5 people on a route because, again, Fancy really wasn't willing to blitz anymore, after that first drive. So what happened here was, again, what made Tripp such a great formation was his S-post. And, again, that was a really tough catch right there. More often than not, they probably dropped that, especially since I think J-Well went for the rack. But that's why it made Tripp so difficult, or what made Tripp so good was his S-post, because it did a good job of splitting both of the deep halves. So if you were on defense, that was really the big money route that you were worried about majority of the game, and you kind of had to play defense around that and have your inside thirds on the field instead of just, again, those deep halves, again, do a great job of protecting the deep silence, but they're going to give up that deep middle, as you saw there. Now here we get to another one of the biggest plays of the game, 3rd and 8, and this will win or lose you Madden games. It, again, is the red zone. Again, you'll see J-Wall is out in the bunch head end. Again, he primarily runs trips head end, so J-Wall was getting a little creative here, and that's really what you have to do in the red zone is you kind of have to get out of your main set and just find different plays, whether it's a stock deep in route, those stock 10-yard in routes are usually really good in the red zone, because just like outside the red zone, you have your routes like the crossers that that really beat any zone in the game. When you're in the red zone, really those stock 10-yard end routes are really good plays. Also things like motion slants, motion drags. Again, you have to get a little bit creative down here, and a lot of times you'll see pros leave their main formation because, again, the spaces of the field just become so condensed that you have to think outside the box a little bit down here. And as you see, a lot of times too in the red zone, you just got to make these plays, and that's really been the biggest difference in this game is the red zone. It looks like Jay was about to get 7 here, and he was able to convert these 3rd and longs. As you saw, Fancy was unable to in the red zone. He was getting counted to 3. So here from J-Well's perspective, these were really his 2 main defenses. So when Fancy didn't motion over, J-Well was running 2 men under because he knew that there wasn't too many routes to beat man coverage on no motion over. So again, if you're trying to get better at Madden, you got to pick up on small tendencies like that. So when somebody is not motioning over in a formation like trips head end, again, J-Well knew that certain weaknesses of the formation. Then when Fancy motioned over and trips head end, he knew that, again, the formation basically changes and there's different weaknesses. So you got to be picking up on when somebody. So again, you got to be picking up on those small details, like what are someone's best plays when they motion, what are someone's best plays when they don't motion, and find the counters to that. And J-Wall knew, that the counter to no motion over trips was, this 2-minute under look because Fancy really couldn't utilize, the play. Fancy really couldn't utilize the playmaker drag. That was really the purpose of having the B playmaker or having the playmaker ability on B was to get that receiver open on the drag. Plus, if you complemented that with the motion over crosser, again, that motion over crosser, it got that free release versus man coverage, and that allowed that crosser to get open since it wasn't getting pressed by the one step ahead. But when Fancy didn't motion over Y, again, he's not going to get that free release. He's going to get pressed by his man. That allows the crosser to not get open. So you're really limited. You were really limited as to what you could do versus man on this meta when you didn't motion over. And as you see, I mean, Fancy really didn't have anyone open there, but you saw this a lot in the D-Croft game too, where there are many plays where Fancy didn't have someone, but he was able to extend the play and just find someone, and that's really what happened there. But you're going to see that Fancy is going to start going back to the motion over because he knows that he's limited on options when he doesn't motion over. And that's another reason why trips was so good too, was because, again, the trip set was, when the trip set was man line, you got to pay attention to, look at the numbers on the right side. Again, that right guard is going to look to block the right of screen defensive end. The right tackle looks like his job is going to be, the strong safety, and then the outside linebacker gets the tight end. So really it's just going to come down to the user and the halfback. Well, actually, he shifted there, so that's going to make it a little bit hard, and Fancy's going to take it to the end of the quarter. And again, you saw this versus D-Croft. This was Fancy's main play versus D-Croft was, again, the B slant with the motion over crosser. And again, the rules of defense change on that motion over. So, again, now that you really have the threat of the crosser getting open because he's getting that free release, again, you have to play defense a little bit differently now. So that's where you saw when before no motion over is 2 and under. Now, J-Will's really only defense when he did this was, he gave the touchdown on Sensix. Man, that was just terrible defense. But his main defense, again, it comes back to this. J-Will did this basically the entire game. And I know he said he's screaming right now that I meant to guard that. I think he had his zone drops on the wrong thing. But again, it's really man across the board, except on that trip side, again, he has a double maple. And again, double maple is when you have two sideline defenders guarding at different depths. So usually people will put their cloud flats at 30 and then like their purples at 5 because, again, the flats at 30, they drop back 30 yards from the line of scrimmage. They do a good job of guarding those deep crossers. And the 5 purples obviously guard the drags. And again, as you see here, pick up onto the tendencies here. Pay attention to the small details. Fancy didn't motion over. And again, you see that J-Wall is going to be in straight up man coverage. And you see no one's going to get open. Again, J-Wall knows the options are really limited. Again, there's not many routes to beat man if you're not playmakering, the B drag. So again, J-Wall was always in man when Fancy didn't motion over in trips. So again, I know a lot of people always say, oh, competitive matters. They just run the same defense over and over. I hope you guys are starting to see, kind of the behind the scenes look of, there's a lot of strategy involved. And again, it's all dependent on, certain motions, certain situations on what you need to be calling. And again, I really do like Fancy going back to this play with the slant. He had this a little bit earlier, but J-Will had his zone drop a little bit lower here. And again, that was just a really bad read from Fancy. But again, you're going to see here, it's that double maple look on the left side of the field from J-Will the entire game. So again, I'm going to take it back here. Again, I think the biggest drawback to Fancy's game is he never sent his running back out on a route the entire game. He never did that in the D-Croft game as well. And that allowed J-Will to really allocate all of his resources on defense towards that left side of the field. Again, you see that his safety and his outside linebacker are dedicated towards guarding that left sideline. Because, again, Fancy's primary play call was the motion over crosser. And, again, once you get to these higher levels, and that's why it made it hard for me to pick Fancy in this game, was because, again, he starts locking into certain parts of the field, and he just starts play spamming and forgets to account for other aspects of the field. And once when you have played somebody so many times, they're familiar with your best plays, they're comfortable with how to stop your best plays, and you're really going to have to figure it out and adjust in the game as to, okay, what parts of the field are not being accounted for, what players am I not using enough. And Fancy just never ever used his running back, so JWoww did not have to allocate any resources to the running back. And you're going to see here, this right side of the field, again, obviously B is manned up to B, but again, JWoww does not have anybody on the right side, no flat zone defender on the right side of the field, because again, Fancy never attacked that part of the field. He never sent out his running back, so again, JWoww really doesn't even have to put a flat zone there. Again, JWoww was really just playing to challenge Fancy's best play calls. Again, he had a good strategy coming into the game, and he really didn't have to adjust out of it too much because, again, he was able to stop a lot of Fancy's best plays with this, and Fancy, again, he just started play spamming and was not able to really, he wasn't really playing the player, he was just kind of playing the formation. And I always tell people you got to play the player. And again, what I mean by that is everybody's going to run a certain meta defense a little bit differently. So you have to create plays in the game based on what someone is specifically doing versus you. And that play creation should come based off the fact, okay, what parts of the field is someone leaving open? And as you see, again, Fancy is really looking to attack that left side of the field with the crossing route. Again, he does have the drag and the tight end corner, but this B drag is really irrelevant. This isn't going to attack like it isn't going to flood this right side of the field. It isn't going to make JWoww account for it with any flat zone defenders because JWoww every single play, B and the tight end are manned up. So again, JWoww did not have to put any flat zone defenders over there. Again, as you saw, the tight end and B are manned up. But you see this this area on the right side of the field is wide open. But Fancy just has to utilize a different player to get into that area of the field. Again, the running back is not manned up. If Fancy had wheeled his running back, I really think it would have killed JWoww's game plan. Again, the thing when you're playing JWoww from an offensive perspective, from my experience, is, again, you have to get JWoww, just like I'm talking about with Fancy, thinking past his best plays on offense. Again, JWoww can come into a game with a good strategy and defense, but JWoww really struggles to adjust in the game on defense once you kind of figure out what the weaknesses of his game plan is. And again, Fancy never throughout this game was able to figure out that if he had just wheeled his running back, again, it would have made it a lot tougher on JWoww. It would have opened up that crosser more for him that he loved to go to way too much. And again, at this part of the game, he's starting to play spam again. You've ran this play majority of the game on the biggest play of the game. You have to expect JWoww to play defense for it, and he has really the entire game. So this was to me, this was a poor play call by Fancy. Again, he's starting to get way too repetitive on offense. Now, second 10, this is the biggest play again. Again, Fancy is coming in. He's just crosser, same play. Again, this is easily the worst part of Fancy's Madden game. His worst tendency that he's developed is, as games go on, he just starts to play spam when someone has become familiar with him. Again, you got to figure out, again, what players someone is not accounting for, what areas of the field someone is not accounting for, and start to freestyle a little bit. Again, Fancy is just keeps coming back to the same play. He's getting stubborn here on offense. And, JWoww, I mean, he's been locked in on this play, majority of the game. He hasn't fully played the hour out like that yet. But, again, Fancy just came back to this play way too much towards the end of this game. And he really allowed JWoww to run the same defense the entire game on defense. And JWoww was able to play good defense in this game because, Fancy, really neglected, other parts of the field and just kept trying to hit the cross in the out route. Now you get JWell again to a 2nd and 13. Again, JWell is going to run 5 out again. And again, since that first drive, Fancy just has completely stopped blitzing, and I don't know why. Because, again, the times that JWell has really got stopped in this tournament was when he was sending 5 people on a route. Again, definitely the worst part of JWell's offensive performances so far in this club series was his 5 out. When he was starting to get pressured, he was starting to make some bad reads. And even at the beginning of this game, Fancy got him to throw a pick 6 on the 5 out. And for whatever reason, he just got away from it. JWell popped the blitz one time. He just completely abandoned it for no reason. And again, JWell's just consistently running 5 out here. And JWell, again, on a 3rd and 13, again, you got to pick 6 on the biggest play of the game. Again, you really need to stop here, even a turnover. And again, JWell is going to send 5 out again because he knows that Fancy just has completely stopped blitzing for whatever reason. And, you know, he ends up playing, again, Fancy did play really good defense majority of this game. But I feel like he had an opportunity to create some turnovers if he had, you know, blitzed a little bit more in this game because, again, JWell's play calls right now are 1,000% just designed to beat, you know, coverage defense. Again, once the blitz was starting to get mixed in, that's where JWell was having trouble. And you see here, that was just a bad user by Fancy. I think he expected the pulse route to come behind him. And again, he just gives up that drag underneath. And this was really the biggest difference in this game was the red zone. And JWell was capitalizing down here in the red zone. And I believe now 2 of his 3 drives, he was able to, you know, convert those 3rd downs where Fancy was not. I gotta change blue light. Fuck. Again, JWell just runs, you know, gives Fancy the money drive, and again, it's insanity at this point because as you see, Fancy has got to pick up onto. Look at the right side of the field. There is nobody. I mean, JWell has particular guys band up like B and the tight end, you know, to guard someone from running into the flats. But Fancy has got to pick up on this right side of the field is wide open and nobody is on the running back. Fancy in this game and his last game never ever sent out the running back, and JWell was able to fully take advantage of it with this strategy. And again, JWell basically ran the same defense every single play on motion over. And again, it did a great job of challenging Fancy's best play calls, and Fancy was not able to figure it out in the game that he had the halfback sideline open the entire game and allowed JWell to run double maple. And again, Fancy, I don't mind the shot play here on 1st and 10. The thing is, if it's not there, you just got to roll out and throw it away. You cannot take a sack here. Again, Fancy takes an unnecessary sack there. I don't know why he was trying to run with this quarterback. You really have to throw that ball away in that situation. I don't mind the play call. They're taking a shot, but get out of there with your quarterback. Throw the ball away. And again, finally in this game, you know, Fancy sends out the running back, and you see he just needs a little bit better of a play design. Again, I don't think Fancy is intending to get the running back open on this play, but as you see here, the running back is open for a lot of yards. I mean, he has, you know, the B drag kind of running into it, but you see here, Fancy had done this more throughout the game, and this was really the first time too where JWell dropped the flats on the both sides. At this point of the game, you really have to play defense like that. 30 is on both sides. 30 flat zone, your zone drops. Just protect those deep sidelines. Again, you don't want to give up any crossers and let someone get out of bounds, but Again, even with those 30 flats out there, again, that running back is wide open for, 15 to 20 yards. And again, Fancy wasn't even looking to that area of the field at any point of the game. And again, he's still just going to the crossing route over and over and over, and it just hasn't been there. And you see here, guys, remember from earlier in the game, too. Again, Fancy's going to go back to the same. This play just has not worked for Fancy. Again, at this point in the game, it's pretty tough in this situation regardless. But again, this play has just not worked for Fancy at all in this game. And he goes back to it again on the 3rd and 14. Again, every time Fancy was in no motion over, again, JWO was well aware that, okay, he's not going to use the playmaker drag. There's really not too much that can get open versus man. So JWO just ran man every time Fancy was in no motion over trips. And really, Fancy just came back to this play every time. It was just never there in this game. And again, for the game, again, I mean, you got to kind of expect JWO to not give up a bomb in this situation. I mean, again, regardless, that's a really tough situation, so I get it. But, as always, guys, good games, bro, forever. Again, I really think the biggest aspect of this game was, again, both of these guys honestly played really good defense in each other. Again, I think there's like 3 keys to the game was, I guess, when JWO did get in the red zone, he was making the most of his opportunities. Whereas Fancy wasn't able to convert some of his third downs in the red zone. Again, also I think a huge play in the game was, I think if Fancy catches that pick six on the first play of the game, Fancy wins this game. Again, both of these guys honestly really struggled on offense. It really just came down to, who was getting, it was really just kind of bounce back plays or, waiting for routes to get open on those 3rd and longs. No one was really, getting open throughout the course of the game for either side. So again, not getting that pick six at the start of the game was huge for Fancy. And JWO honestly just came with a really good strategy for Fancy. Again, he knew Fancy's weakness, and he challenged Fancy to think past his best plays, and Fancy failed to do that in this game. And unfortunately, when he capitalized off what JWO wasn't doing well, again, Fancy wasn't able to get rewarded with the pick. So again, those were really the biggest aspects of the game. But anyways, guys, that's a good games, bro, forever. And if you guys want more in-depth gameplay breakdowns like this, again, make sure to check out themanacademy.com. Again, in our courses, again, they're really gameplay intensive where I go into detail, whether it be with pocket presence, adjusting on the fly, situational play calling, game management, clock management. Again, we have all those courses on the site with gameplays just like this. Also, take our free skills evaluation, see where you stack up. I know you're curious. Well, anyways, guys, I'm out. Good games, bro, forever. TheMaddenAcademy.com. Like and subscribe.